Hey everybody, got this Willie up in a jig and I want to talk a little bit about what I did to get it there. Show you guys starting a new project, and one of my buddies said you need to show a little bit more on how you do things. So I'm gonna try to start a little earlier in this video and give you some tips on how to do this. I've talked about some of this stuff in other videos on how I prop the cars up and everything. So basically, when I'm doing this, I use jack stands or blocks of wood to prop the body up and base everything off of one dimension in the rear of the car to start. Try to get the wheelbase right and, the width of the rear end housing, and I'm going to show you all that stuff right now. So here we go. What I've talked about before is getting a couple junk axles to bolt the wheels to, and these are axles, of course. I worked out the Mosier, so I would pull axles with different bolt patterns out of the junk piles to do this stuff. You can use a standard Ford axle, it doesn't matter. You just, knock the studs out and weld a bolt in it. You can do it with one bolt. Like these have all the studs in it, but you can just stick one bolt in the hole and tack weld it, 3/8 bolt, put a nut and a washer on it just to hold the wheel upright. I use an axle, and then I've got this piece of tube in here. These slide in and out. It's not welded permanently. So what I'll do is I'll get it to this point and I'll bolt the wheels on it, and then I sort of set the body over the top of it in the rear. Cars like this here that I'm building, I have one dimension, a set dimension I try to stick with. But what this does is you can slide these in and out on that tube and get the wheels where you want from side to side, so it looks good underneath the body, and then you can measure from this flange to this flange, and that gives you a wheel-to-wheel dimension, which is real important when you're ordering a rear end housing or building a rear end housing. Then you can take your dimensions from that. Now all the stuff I'm using here, this dimension from here to here is called the B dimension. And those guys may ask you that once in a while ordering a housing, so they know what housing in and how far this sticks out. This is like for a Torino hangout, a new style Ford, which from the face here to where the housing end is, which is like 1/8 of an inch back on this bearing, is 2.5 inches. So when you're determining a housing width, you're going to have a 1/4 inch rotor on here. So you take a 1/2 inch off, 1/4 per side, and then you subtract 2.5 times 2, which is 5, and that gives you your housing width. But you can share that information with Mosiers when you order a housing, and they can build the housing the right width for you. So I build all my own stuff, always have. So and I do the same thing at the front end. I've got another set of axles that I'll bolt the front wheels on and roll it around underneath the front end to get the wheelbase I want. Because these cars are so short, I try to crowd the wheels as far ahead as I can. In these cars here, you got to be careful, because if you're putting headlights in it, you can't get the wheels too far forward. They'll rub on the headlight buckets. But this car won't have headlights, so I'm trying to shove the wheelbase out a little bit farther to make the car a little bit longer and more stable. So I'll show you a little bit about the body. That's my rear end structure there, and the reason why I built this way is so I can get in this hole here in the back of the jig to work on the rear end and the suspension and stuff. The other ones, as you can see, they go across the jig like that, and they're tacked down to the jig. As you can see, my jig has scribe lines on it here, and then what I've done is I put a mark there to center this, and I can also pull a string line through it. I showed you before up front there in front of this other one, I've got a bolt right in the middle that I can triangulate and measure to. That helps a lot. That's pulled through on the center line of the jig. You can see I got center lines on the body fixtures that I've made. And then up front, you can see I've got my laser on here. I just got the front end setting up on the jig. I got to build a fixture to hold that up yet. So that's my next step. But what I do then, and this is important, I've cut the inner wheels out of this because he did not, or wheel wells out of this because he did not want the tire sticking out of the body. He didn't want rubber slung over it, and I'm a believer in that too. So what I do is I measure from this point right here to the top of my jig 36 inches. That's sort of a given dimension for the stuff that I build. This is going to have a 33-inch tire on it to start. I mean, but if he wants to run a 32-inch later, he can. He's got the option there. But you go from the top of the jig to where the top of the tire is going to be up in here. That's 36 inches. That's where you start. So what I did is I put the tires underneath the car. And you see this little piece here? I taped that in there so the tire could butt into that, so I knew I had at least 1 inch of clearance in the front. And then I put like 4 blocks of wood underneath the tires down here on the floor to hold the tire still, and then I jiggle the body around where I wanted it. To get the back end where, you know, to get the back end set. So I had like a 3-inch block of wood up in here, 3.5-inch block of wood on top of the tire that the body set on. And then what I did is I came up to the front here and I just stuck a couple jack stands right here on the floor. Roll the front axle underneath it here, and then set the front end on to try to get that margin as close as I could to determine where we were there. Then we raised and lowered the jack stands. So we had about 1 inch of clearance from here to the top of the tire. We could have got it lower, but I was trying not to put any more rake in this car than I already have. You know, and it's 14 inches off the ground in the back, but it is what it is. It has to be that high to make the tires fit underneath it. Is it going to be cool? Yeah. Is there room to jam everything in there? Yeah. I could have got really crazy and raised the fenders up in the body, but this is what he wanted. So typically, and if you think about it, I go 36 inches, you know, to the inside of that fender, you know, for clearance. I do that on every car, whether it was like this Mustang, you know, from the ground to the inside of the fender, 36 inches. Do the tubs go all the way up in this one? No, they don't, but that's just how I build a car. In this one here, I'll have to build custom wheel tubs, of course, for this one. Like regular wheel tubs won't work, but we get that set there, and the frame rails, they'll be even with the bottom of the rocker down here, the bottom of the frame rails, but then the 4-link brackets, this car will have a 4-link, they'll stick down. They'll be, bottom hole will be about 8 inches off the top of this table, so you'll see them from the side of the car, but it is what it is. Like I say, these fenders are pretty low in this car because it was designed for a little tire. So the car would have been a lot lower to the ground, but this is what we have to work with. So then what I do is I get my jig level from side to side. I know my fixtures are set so they're right. And what I've done here, I'll try to show you on this one. I welded a little piece of angle iron on there with a hole in it so I could bolt the body to that. I did that on all 6 points. And then what I do is I come in and I measure from my laser that I've got turned on in the back, that I've got centered on the car, to like this inside quarter, and I make that the same on both sides. Then I come up here and do the same thing like in the front. I did it from this point right here. I measured to that to get it the same on both sides. Then what I do is I came down in this corner. You can see I drilled a 3/16 hole right in that corner, and I stuck a plumb line through there from a plumb bob down to the jig, and then I could measure from my starting point corner on my jig to that line to get that parallel with the line that goes across the jig from side to side. Got that done. Then what I did back here is I found the center here. You can see right there, I drilled an 1/8 inch hole right there, measured where the center off the parting lines and off these corners of the body, off this, I found the center, and I drilled a hole there so that my laser, I could sight my laser line to that point, and then I knew the body was equidistant on the jig in the back. Then drilled and bolted these down. And then that makes everything nice and solid. And you can do this with a steel body too. Like on a steel body, I usually just tack weld those to the pinch welds in the rocker, so. But that's where I'm at with this thing. I've got the firewall cut out of it because it's going to get a Hemi in it, so I got to try to crowd it back as far as I can. And it needs a metal firewall, not a fiberglass one, being it's a race car. So what I will also do later on is I'll find the middle of the windshield opening, and I'll drill a hole in the top there and drop a plumb bob down just to triple check and make sure that the top of the car's square as well. So, and the only way I can do anything with that is pull it with a ratchet strap or something. But that's where I'm at with this car here. I'm hoping that helps a little bit on how I do this kind of stuff. As you can see, it looks really high because it's so high in the air. But honestly, it looked good sitting on the ground. With the wheels and tires underneath it, it looked really cool. So, and remember too, something else I'll share. When you're building these things, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure when this is all done, if the shock in the back is completely compressed, the tire don't rub in the top of the fender well opening. That's why I set it at 36, because we're at a 33-inch tall tire in this car, okay? And we were using a 7/8 stroke rear shock. So it's going to have 3.5 inches. If you center the shocks, which I don't, I typically set them 60% compressed, you end up with about 3 inches of travel total. So that's what you're looking for when it's done. And I'll do that. I'll put the shocks on it and jack the tire up into the opening and make sure that it clears those bolts and stuff in there. I'll probably, like right now, you can see I've got 1/4 inch bolts in there. I'll probably buy button-headed screws and put in there so they're round and smaller. So, but that's what I have right now just to hold everything together. Anywho, that's where I'm at with this jalopy. Like I say, next step's going to be making a fixture to set the front end on so I can get that going. And then what I'll do is build the rear end housing. I think what I'll probably do in my next video is explain how I come up with the dimensions that I come up with. I might have already done that in another video, but I don't hurt to hear it again. So thanks for keeping up with me. See ya.